So Keith, once again, thank you so much for your time. I know you don't appear much on social media, but I've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And you're right that I prefer to operate from behind the scenes, but I'm happy to chat with you.
Awesome. And so the first question that I have for you is, like, how would you describe what you do? Do you call yourself a capital allocator?
Yeah. I think if you reflect on what allocating actually is, capital allocation takes a lot of forms. You can allocate if you're a CEO to various projects. You can allocate if you're a venture capital investor or if you're an entrepreneur, but we're all sort of allocating every day our most important resource, which is time. In terms of how we brand ourselves, I don't look at us as capital allocators as much as just investors. And we wake up every day with this pool of capital and ask ourselves, what's the best way and what's the most pragmatic way to perpetuate this performance over the long term? And I think the more constraints or buckets or sort of boxes you draw around that approach, the more difficult it's going to be to succeed. So as much as possible, we try to keep a very open approach to the way that we think about investing and the way that we think about partnering with people.
And how did you get yourself into this world? Like when did you realize in your career that this is for you and this is your passion?
Yeah. Interesting question. So I started out having an aptitude for math, and I loved competing. And investing was the natural intersection of those two things, like a lot of people. And my career started actually growing up. I had some quantum of capital. The place that I grew up, they basically pay an annual dividend to its residents. And I had this investment problem as a teenager, which first turned me on to investing, and then studied applied mathematics and actually Japanese in school, and started doing equity research near the end of my undergraduate education, and knew that I wanted to be a buy-side investor. And so when I first started, I was picking stocks for high net worth families in Southern California, actually, and we grew that business, and it eventually sold in the early 2000s, and then ran a pension plan and some family offices before eventually joining the Stanford University Endowment. And what I loved about these institutional approaches was the much wider ambit and the much more open investment approach to lots of different alternative asset classes. And after years at Stanford, was sought out actually by the partners at Sequoia to basically build a business doing some subset of what we were doing at Stanford, but for the private sector. And that was the beginning of what became Sequoia Heritage.
Interesting. And so you knew this very early on that this was your thing.
I think there was a lot of people start picking stocks at age 12 and know that that's their thing. I'd say I took a more generalist approach, which cast a wide net and funneled down bit by bit into the things that I loved. I mean, Heritage isn't just an investment management business. It was also a startup, and it was also something that we built from scratch. And so I had those entrepreneurial instincts as well, and that we've been able to both build something from the ground up and invest, which is, I think, our collective passion as a team, is a dream, I think. And to have had some success to this point as well is nice, but no one views any of this as mission accomplished.
Where do you think that mindset or framework of thinking come from?
So I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. And what's interesting about Alaska is there's one person for every roughly 1.3 square miles. So it's a vast place, it's a rugged place, and it's a place where kind of nature is right next door. So what you learn there are just basic survival skills and independent thinking. And I came to investing not from a background that my parents had done this, or I was, at that point anyway, mentored by the greats. I just came to it very much from the bottom up, that it was something I was super interested in and passionate about. The more I learned about it and the more that I studied math, I loved applied mathematics and the ability to sort of model and predict and iterate and work on those things. And over time, I came to it, but I don't think my arrival was as fast as some, but it was definitely one of high conviction in terms of determining I would go there. So yeah, I came to college with the goal of figuring out how to build a skill set that could be applied to investing. And that's certainly how that came about. In terms of the other out of the box thinking, I mean, my parents were very interesting people in that they moved to Alaska, both of them, before Alaska was even a state, one of the 50 United States. And they were allocated land as homesteaders to basically claim that land, and they had to prove it out by living on it. There was no running water, there was no electricity, and my mom had many, 2 or 3 young kids, and was hauling water up, breaking the ice and pulling water out to kind of come up to this sort of makeshift home that they had in the woods. And it was from that sort of place that they eventually actually built up savings, and my dad a career. He worked as an electrician and for the oil companies, but they eventually ended up doing some investing. And we didn't know much about this as kids, but they did real estate investing. They did a couple private equity deals. They invested in the first health club in Alaska, which became kind of a monopoly there. And they had opened one of the first Sizzler restaurants. And so they had these instincts, and I think those were some of the things that were transmitted to us, though we didn't realize it at the time. And that sort of kind of fighter spirit definitely comes in part from them.
Interesting. And you got involved, or you invest in a lot of different asset classes, very different types of investment vehicles, and equities, to a wide range of things. Is there sort of like a common, what do you call it, sort of common criteria that you look for, or something that's commonalities in thesis that are good investment thesis?
Yeah. Both with investments and investors, there isn't some paint by number approach. I think what you have to do is understand, I think, first who a person is. And I think a lot of people don't spend enough time understanding what motivates people, because what you're really trying to do with an investor when you meet them is analyze the present value of their future decisions. And it's a very dynamic thing. What their personal life is like, what their personality is like. It is the investment approach that they're taking a good match for their personality? Do those two things work together? Or did they just come into this approach because they thought they could make a lot of money doing that? And then as you get to know the great investors over time, you see that they do share some commonalities. They're incredibly driven, and they have some sort of niche that they're able to exploit and uniquely, continually and repeatedly identify, which I think is pretty terrific. And then they never take their eye off the ball, which is, in the end, it's performance. I think as a lot of investment organizations evolve, they get distracted with the expanding team or the expanding size of the business and forget the initial mission, which is very clear to a fund that's just launching, because they're fighting to survive. So also the evolution and motivations of an organization matter. So those are some of the key things. And then in terms of investments themselves, the best investments that we've made have been durable, in that they've had moats around them. They've had driven founders who understand those moats and strengthen them. And then I think they've taken the time they've taken time to get the little things right along the way. And they're very tuned into the details, including and especially hiring the right sorts of people. I was talking with someone who was very involved with Amazon in the early days of the building of that business recently. And what I learned from them was just how involved Jeff Bezos was in the selection of people in the early days of Amazon. And that was something that I think matters a lot to building these organizations and succeeding there. So
no, there's a lot there. Definitely lessons and insights there that definitely applies to me. I'll definitely make sure that, I don't take the eye off the ball and sort of morph into something that's totally different from what we initially sort of aimed for. But I totally agree on people. It's all about the people, like getting great people and making sure that they perform. I'm curious to hear how you manage sort of Sequoia Heritage, especially around the people, and how you identify talent and how you nurture them.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that Sequoia Heritage has always been a we. It's not a me. And I think if you think about our approach, even from the day that you join the firm, if you're a brand new investor into Heritage, we're asking for your opinion and your perspective. And I think different from a lot of organizations, we try to actually throw experience out of each discussion and try to approach every situation with fresh eyes and say, does this make sense? Even if we've looked at the category, or even if we've considered partnering with the person in the past, we try to throw that out and look at every situation with fresh eyes. So that's an important consideration for us. And then as you think about building the firm or the team, there are a number of values that really matter. Clear, concise communication, very direct communication, which can be alarming to people. I've noticed over time builds trust, and people know exactly where you stand on things. Then it's easier and much more efficient to move the ball forward. A strong ownership mentality. People need to be bought in and believe in what you're doing. And it's so easy to spot someone who is not moving forward at the same pace or with the same passion as everyone else. We have we have a large pool of assets, and regardless, we just have an investment team that's 6 people and an organization that's 22 total. And when you think about that in the context of what we do, each person matters. And I've noticed over the years that that's very important to people. Money and compensation matters a lot, but what actually matters more is feeling a sense of that what someone does in any sort of work actually matters to the firm, and that their contributions are very important. And when you have a small team, it really matters. And so we've been very deliberate about not growing our team in proportion with our assets as we've grown. So those are some of the things I think that have helped Heritage along and been contributors to whatever success we've had so far.
I resonate with every word you said. I love small teams with highly motivated people with ownership, right? And so that is definitely something where we're striving for, and so that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
You've been very close with Michael Moritz, Doug Leone, Roelof Botha, the great leaders of Sequoia Capital. From your perspective, what is it that they do, or what attributes do they have that makes Sequoia special?
Yeah. So in the early days of building Heritage, I had the privilege of sitting in on a regular basis on the investment meetings of Sequoia Capital. And I used to just listen and watch and observe the process because I was very curious, what process was it that led this small group to have such a disproportionate share of winning outcomes? And I was shocked and alarmed in some ways at the nature of the debate that took place in those meetings. It was fierce debate. And you may know that Sequoia has a consensus approach to how they look at investing. And so everyone on the team has to support an investment if it's going to make it across the line. And if they don't, the investment doesn't get done. And so that led to some very healthy debates. But they would then leave the room and everyone was totally fine with it. And I realized that they had really espoused this very direct, almost confrontational, but kind of heartfelt truth-seeking with every investment that they looked at. They, by nature, collectively are the sorts of people who are never satisfied and never sit back. There's always something that can be done, and there's always something that can be done better. They're very different people. You just mentioned Michael and Doug and Ruach. They're entirely different people, which I think has also been additive to the franchise over the years. Is if you look at the different perspectives and personalities that they bring, they're really good communicators, both with their partners and externally. And I think they can message things very well, including difficult messages, and have been willing, I think, to have difficult conversations with people over the years. I guess the last thing I'd say about them is, and having experienced this myself, is when they back you, they don't hesitate. And there's no kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out in terms of how they support people and businesses. Their backing actually really means something, and it's meaningful enough that it makes businesses. And that's something that we've learned a lot from in Heritage. When we look to partner with people, we want to put everything we can behind them to help them succeed and be part of the reason that they've succeeded. And it matters a lot to us.
Just one more question about Sequoia Capital. I believe they're pretty much maybe the only firms, venture capital firms, that's been successful with succession. And like, given what you've seen, like, how would you advise people like myself on succession planning? Because I feel like I still have 30, 40 years of runway in me. Should I even be thinking about succession planning?
You should be thinking about it. And I think it's something that Sequoia has historically done really well. It's something that we've tried to do within Heritage, but it takes a long time to imbue a culture and an approach and a series of relationships on a team. And I'm 47, soon to be 48. And we have, I think, the second generation in the firm today. We're working on the third generation right now. I don't plan on going anywhere in the near future, but it's really important that the business not be dependent on me or anyone else. And more than that, if we can create a community of people who can impact other founders or partners or investment managers that we may have, I think that matters a lot. And it helps us get operational leverage and do what we're doing a little bit better. And more importantly, it helps us to create. I think if you don't invest in the next generation and don't bring people up, then it also constrains you as the head of an organization or as a founder from creating and innovating. You get stuck processing. And, I have wonderful partners, and they are incredibly driven people who have taken a heavy load that allows me to spend time doing other things, which can move the business in a good direction. So I think it's very important to do. It's not about age. It's about the business and doing what's right for the business as a standalone entity.
Mm-hmm. And to make, to find that, to nurture that next generation, are there things that you are like sort of aware of or trying to encourage so that the next generation sort of gets nurtured more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're the best nurturers, to be honest with you. I don't think we do an amazing job of training people, or historically anyway, I don't think we've been among the best sort of teachers that I've seen. But what we do is we give our young people a ton of responsibility, and we see how they deal with it. And it sort of requires an entrepreneurial approach on their part to say, holy cow, I was 2 or 3 positions away from doing what I'm doing right now. How am I going to deal with this moment? And again, that's something that I've learned over my time here. And it's the best way to flush out how people will evolve over time, is just give them a ton of responsibility and, of course, support. I do think we try to lead by example and do a good job of that, but we leave it to people to figure out the steps in between and to see if they have that entrepreneurial energy to go solve problems.
No, that's super important. I think, the entrepreneurial energy, the mindset of entrepreneurship, especially for people who's gonna sort of be your successor or be the next leadership in the team. Yeah. And one other question about, this is more tactical. Do you have any advice on emerging managers like us regarding fund size?
Okay, within that market, what's the right approach? And within Japan and within SaaS and within these areas that you have domain expertise, what's the right fund size? Well, we've definitely seen how capital can help companies, but too much capital can also hurt companies. It keeps them from running inefficiently. People don't appreciate the cost of capital if it comes too easily and there's too much of it. And you don't build a culture that is really tightly run. Again, going back to the foundations of a company like Amazon, they ran very tightly in the early days. And if you look at like the cost of when they delivered AWS to the market, it was, for that time, unbelievable what came to market and the cost of that and how sort of consumer and customer focused it was. That's the sort of thing you have to be thinking about when you roll up a fund size. And too many people are focused on writing the next big check or being able to support super pro rata or all these private equity terms, but more focus probably ought to be on what's the right amount of capital for the company to get the result that you're looking for long term. Even as I think about some of the companies that we've partnered with, they're very well run and they appreciate capital and they're very careful about the folks that they partner with on the capital side.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thinking bottoms up and making sure, thinking what's best for the companies and what's best for the opportunity set, right? And so definitely I agree that too much makes things more inefficient and really could mess things that is working, right? Especially for the companies that we partner with. And so no, definitely that is great advice, and that's something we'll probably continue to struggle with and always think about what is right. But I think it's definitely something we should always be thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the private equity data, there's a pretty clear correlation between fund size and multiple. Whereas it goes up, the net multiple tends to come down.
True. What is something that excites you about the Japanese software market or the SaaS market in particular?
Well, this is a leading question because I love Japan and I really love the Japanese people. And some of the things that I like about them are just the very beautiful attention to detail and the care and concern for customers and customer service. It is the world standard, clearly, in those areas. And so if you consider those attributes against a declining population, which we know about, and some of the inefficiency that clearly exists within Japanese corporations and the way in which they operate. The natural solution for that gap is technology. And the Japanese are very good at technology, and high-end technologies. And so it was odd to me that SaaS in particular hadn't played a bigger role to this point for all of those reasons, but it's very clear that it should play an important role in the future.
Yeah, we definitely feel it's going to be inevitable that SaaS will penetrate the market very well. And a lot of people, a lot of businesses will adopt it, especially for the reasons that you mentioned, better support, better customer success, and customer service, because Japan is very particular about, delivering good value, great value to the customers.
Yeah.
And, you spent some time, I can't remember how old you were when you spent some time in Japan.
I was 19.
You were 19. Okay. So you were very, very, a young man back then. And you probably seen Japan change over time, right? And so what changes have you seen in Japan, and is there anything that you feel optimistic about in those changes?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think the focus of young people has changed a lot over the years, and they are much more entrepreneurial a generation than they were in the mid-90s when I was in Japan. That was many years ago. It's almost 30 years ago, 27 years ago, when I lived full-time in Japan, and I was there for a few years. But I think globalization, the internet, which is funny to say, but it wasn't really much of a thing when I was there. And much of the technology change that has taken place has certainly come to the younger generation. So it's a much more entrepreneurial, upbeat group. It's a group of people who are willing to try to build something great and not just settle. So it's almost, there's a little more capitalism present in the market, which I think is fabulous. And, again, technology is coming and continuing to be adopted and grown in ways in which it hasn't been traditionally in Japan. I mean, why isn't, with all of its, for all of the characteristics of the Japanese, why isn't there more of a base of programmers and technology talent in Japan? And I think people are still coming to understand, but incrementally understanding more what's achievable through these sort of technology skill sets. So it's evolving in that way. And I do feel upbeat about where it's heading, but we'll see.
I feel the same. It's hard not to be optimistic, because of the talent and the people that we meet, and sort of the entrepreneurship that we think is rising in Japan. And so I have two last questions for you. One is the theme of this talk series is sprinting through the next 100 years, which kind of may sound awkward because it's a direct Japanese translation of a Japanese phrase. But the question is, what would you like to see in the next 100 years in the world of either capital allocators or entrepreneurship as a whole?
That's not an easy question for me to answer. I have a hard time thinking in 100-year increments. I typically think in 5 to 10-year increments, which I still think is different than most of the market. If you look at stock ownership periods over time, they have trended and continued to trend down, such that the average ownership is, I think, less than 6 months now, in terms of how long people even hold stocks. So what lasts and what's durable? I think values last and are worth investing in and believing in and teaching. And I think certain characteristics of founders and their ambitions are durable. Even tech companies have a cycle, right? Where they mature and decline if they don't continue to reinvent themselves. And we all have to do that. We have to break our businesses every few years to modernize them and make them durable. So enduring is not something that I think just happens. Enduring kind of has this connotation that you're sitting somewhere and fighting and building cement walls and trying to build a building that no one can make their way into. But to me, it's something completely different, which is every few years breaking down the building and using new materials that are modern, more modern, to build it up and have it sort of weather the storms a little bit better. And I think you always have to do that to build businesses that last.
Oh, that's a wonderful quote. And just finally, is there any message or a message that you want to relay to the audience?
I would just say, Saru mo ki kara ochiru. Just keep working, keep trying, keep iterating. I don't know if I even said that right.
You said it perfectly.
Okay. And failure is the mother of success. So celebrate it and seek it, because it's a great teacher. And I continue to learn that every day.
Amen. No, thanks so much for this. It's been a wonderful conversation. Actually, there's a lot of insights there that I think I would love to apply to what I do as well. But thanks so much for your time.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for the partnership. We really enjoy it.
Likewise.